IP, Ninjas in Pyjamas, one of the most iconic Counter-Strike brands, organizations, team names of all time, was founded in the year 2000. But that's not the same as being 25 years old, as we're going to explore in this video. So as you can see here, there was a tweet on the 18th of July on Twitter, on the NIP account, and it said, before League of Legends, before CS skins, even before Steam. 25 years later, we're still here, ninja emoji. Now, the problem is, that's not true, because 25 years later, we're still here, means that you've still been here the whole time. For 25 years, now that's literally not true in any meaningful context when it comes to being a CS organization, because this isn't HeatoN saying, I made NIP 25 years ago with Potty and he didn't even make it, it was actually Potty, etc. But it's not them saying it, it's the org, NIP. It's a modern company who owns the trademark. Now, by the way, ask them when they made that trademark. Was it in 2000? Was it fuck? So let's get into this one, shall we? Because the problem is, if you go to here, it's even going to tell you NIP was founded in the year 2000. But what's that? The team competed in Counter-Strike until their dissolution in 2007. Pause. That's already wrong. So even Liquipedia is wrong, because Liquipedia is going to tell you that NIP's wrong, that actually this org dissolved in 2007. But even Liquipedia is wrong, because Liquipedia would give you the impression it was founded in 2000 and then ran until 2007. Wrong. It actually ran until 2002. Then it dissolved because it wasn't even a proper company at the time. Then it came back for, I think, like 2005, the beginning. Then it went away in 2007, and then it came back in 2012. So it does, as it say here, in 2012, the team returned and then had the CSGO squad, etc., etc. But let's get into some of these details, have we? First of all, if you actually want to read the history of NIP from when it was founded in 2000 as like a fun online team by Potty and Tootsie, if you want to read the history of that and who the early names were, some of them, by the way, were quite famous players you won't know were in the original NIP on clan-based ladder. You'll just know them from other teams, Nordic Division, Game Online, etc. All the other Matrix, the other squads that were out there in early CS. But most interestingly, this article itself I wrote in 2005 when NIP returned and made a super team and branched off from what had been the SK Sweden roster that had all that success and won all those CPLs. So you can go to, just look up ESEA, CS History NIP. It's by Thorin, as you can see there. Back in 2005, I wrote this piece. And in the piece, I take all this information that I found through a mixture of interviews that I'd done at the time. At the time, Google was half decent, and I just knew some of this information. I was able even to find some of it on all the clan-based page, etc. And I give you all the information. I do like a little profile piece where people who actually were in the team are telling you about this sort of a thing. People like Potty and HeatoN and all these other players are telling you all these stories. And as I say, it runs up to when you had them make the squad again in 2005. So first things first, spoiler, this website alone shows you that this isn't accurate and neither is what NIP said. So in 2000, when they made the team, Potty formed it with this guy. Here's what happened. Let's maybe go and have a look here. If you even go on results, you're not going to get anything before that. It's going to make it look like this is the first tournament you ever played at, because the people who made this Liquipedia page are confused by when the team is called NIP or it's called something else, because this isn't the era when teams are giant orgs. Teams are just names you pick to play online scrims and games, and in this case, like online ladders like clan-based, etc. You make a name for your team. It wasn't a registered organisation. You didn't have big sponsors. You didn't have it like a CEO, etc. So as a result, when a team dissolves, that just means the team breaks apart and goes elsewhere and someone joins someone else's team. Or when you get a sponsor, at the time, sometimes you just change the name of the team to the sponsor's name. Well, that's what happened. See, it isn't that the first time they played was in 2001. I mean, as you can see in my article here, it shows you they played a bunch of stuff online, right? So you can see in 2000, they're playing, these are all online cops, by the way. These are all online ladders and cops. they're winning them, but at the time, it's the Wild West. It's complete free-for-all as to like who's actually good. There haven't even been proper LANs in CS at this point in time. The first proper LAN in European Counter-Strike was this one here, where NIP went, but this is where it gets interesting already. So if you go up in my article, it's where I can actually refer to my own article from 20 years ago, because that's the level of gangster I'm on. And by the way, why is it on ESEA? Oh, that's right. I used to literally be an unofficial owner of ESEA, and I used to literally be paid 20% of the profits straight off the top after expenses. Didn't know that, did you? One day I'll tell that story in a video. So if you go to here, you'll see that initially NIP, but then NIP becomes Eyeballers. Now, this is going to confuse you because Eyeballers exists to this day, and Eyeballers is a registered organisation. In fact, JW plays there, doesn't he? And Flusher. So you're going to think, what the hell? Well, which is it? Were they NIP or Eyeballers? Well, actually, this is the interesting thing. NIP, back then, changed name to E9 and essentially joined the Eyeballers organisation, who themselves, by the way, in 2000 was just also a team that was like a Quake TDM team, if you don't know. They had a very good team that did successfully in the clan-based Euro Cup. So that's because at the time, what that basically means is Eyeballers, the organisation, must have some money, hence why we're going to get to go to some CPLs, you'll find out in a minute. So NIP, which is just like a clan-based page, joins the Eyeballers organisation. That's really just essentially NIP renames their CS team to Eyeballers. But in a sense, that's just NIP still. This is why it's so confusing to confuse modern-day companies that are registered and are their own sports franchise organisations from just team names, which back in the day meant an IRC channel, a clan-based listing, and that might even just be it, and usually like an Angel Fire or GeoCities basic-ass fucking janky website with a silly moving GIF on it, like, oh, look at this tech or whatever, and maybe some music sound loop, like if they did with the first NIP website in 2001 with that cool Lothlorien or whatever from Lord of the Rings. Oh, if you remember, that was like the music in the background, except there wasn't some woman like, the world has changed, like just NIP changing CS. So they became Eyeballers in November of 2000, and as you can see down here, but you won't see on Wikipedia, they went to the first CPL in Europe, which was called CPL Cologne. Now, this tournament, they came fourth at. Fun fact. This tournament was won by a team literally cheating. Clan Z, we would say in English, because in England it's Z, not the letter Z, is it? It's Americanism. Clan Z was a Finnish team, which actually had at least one player, I believe, who came from the Quake World team. It was even the guy, was he called Zibbo, who I even think made like a famous, well, you'll understand the concept of the modern day, sort of a thing that was like a VPN, but for like routing to, they have some of them in modern day to claim they'll make your connection faster, because they can. If you can change the routing path to be better, you can sometimes improve your connection speed. It was a big thing in Quake World to use that. He made a thing called Quizmo, which basically was the main thing from Quake World. He also played in early CS. And in fact, you'll even see there's a clip of some of them getting fragged or fragging in like Frag or Die, I think, if you remember back in the day. So that team won the LAN, but it turned out, because they were Finnish and one of them was like a programmer, they were the only team that had used configs and just used all the lower interp, essentially internet settings that made you have a slight advantage on LAN. But at the time, early CPLs for the first like year or two, you had to play with a locked config, which had the game at default rates, which by the way was only like 20 and 30 CMD rate and update rate, if you know what that means, and the rate itself was low. Now, what's mad about that is that meant you had inefficient performance on LAN using these rates. The rates actually, if you don't know, should have been something like, I think it's like 10k is the max for the rate, and then it was something like 100 or 125 or something for the other one. So essentially, everyone was playing a scoffed version of CS, which made the spray less reliable, the shots didn't register in the same way, but everyone had to play like that, and these Finns just thought, well, fuck it, that's inefficient or whatever, and they secretly used this config, won the LAN, but as a result got punished later. But this is one of the reasons why this team only came fourth. Then, this is mental, the first of the American CPLs to even like unofficially properly do CS. They'd had the Razor CPL, but that was like just a buyout tournament, bring your own PC. This one was like an unofficial CS tournament. I think technically Speakeasy next year was the first like official one, and then CPL Winter, everyone knows NIP versus X3. This one here, Babbage's, has a crazy story, which is that one of the players in NIP, I think the story's probably even contained here. Let's have a quick look. Yeah, here we go. So when they went to the CPL Europe event in Cologne, their lineup was going to be these players. So there was Hib, Potty, Bullet, as a guy who later became the manager of NIP. Soul Edge is the brother of Hib and was later a player in Game Online. And it said here, HeatoN and Cogline weren't old enough to attend at the time because you had to be 18. This guy, PK, missed his flight, so they had to use one of the Quake 3 players, who wasn't even a CS player, I think he just played it a bit for fun. A guy called Litzer, a very talented player. And he actually had never played Counter-Strike before, and they still came fourth. Then a similar thing happened when they went to America. They went as eyeballers, E9, to Dallas, Texas, to play to the Babbage CPL. The PK guy missed his flight again. They had to use Litzer again. And this is what's mental. Because this time they had HeatoN, Hib, and Potty, who, if you don't know, are like three of the best Swedish players ever. Three of them were even in the later NIP that was amazing, was dominating European. They were so insane at the time. Potty was probably the best player in the world at the time. That, if you don't know, they actually won the fucking tournament. Now, this is back when it was just using time limit. It wasn't even max rounds or charges only. But by the way, they won this tournament over Rambo was there in a team called Syndicate. There would have been K-Sharp was there with CK3 Blue or whatever, Clan Killers 3 Blue. Bullseye was there, Big Dog was there, a whole bunch of the top players were there. But Potty and the Swedes were so insane at the time, they won basically 4v5, essentially. Then when they went back home, they got people like HeatoN and Executor. Executor, remembers, Danish player who actually played like Spirit of Omega and come second at that CPL Cologne. HeatoN was in a team called Nostradamus. They came back. Also, by the way, if you don't know, the early NIP before this had loads of players you'd know, but you don't only know them from other teams, like Cole Sprutter, who later was in Nordic Division and Matrix. They had people like Gorzy, who was most famously in Game Online in later years. They had Notorious, who was a very good player later in Game Online. Game Online and Nordic Division, and Adrenaline even years later. They had loads of mega players. I mean, this is the early days of playing online mixes, isn't it? Like I say. So after that, they come back and the eyeballers thing breaks up almost immediately. It was in like January of 2001 or something. And so they then fracture. Now we've played some lands, we've even won a CPL. Now it becomes serious. Now people like Tootsie and Cole Sprutter and some others, they go off and make a team called Smile. That's like a funsy team. Meanwhile, Potty, HeatoN, Cogline, Hib, Kuros, they become another team name, Clan 9. So they go from E9 to C9, because I think Eyeball has even played in the Clan 9 Cafe. If you don't know, I don't even think it exists now. Clan 9 was the original, most legendary Stockholm LAN cafe. Most famously, now in the modern day, it's Inferno Online. Funnily enough, thanks to people like SK Gaming and NIP, some of the players like HeatoN and Potty years later playing in the Inferno Online cafe. But before that, the original legendary cafe was Clan 9. If you know anything about Quake, they are the ones who sponsored that really old school Quake World team that had people like Zenon and Duma in it. And famously, they won the first international Quake exhibition match between NA and EU because Clan 9, Quake World team, played against Death Row of Thresh and later people like Machiavelli, etc. But at the time, he wasn't in because he wasn't like a top player in Quake World. And famously, they played like half the games in Quake World, half the games in NetQuake, which is what the Americans played. Although at the time, to be fair, a bunch of the Americans like Thresh had already switched to Quake 2, whereas all the Quake World players stayed in Quake World. So anyway, the point is Clan 9 was a legendary place to go, and you go there for the sponsorship again, so they can potentially pay you to events. Nobody's getting salary at this point in time, by the way, but just getting paid to events, even local lands, by the way, is something. This isn't professional at the time. As I say, HeatoN and Executor joined. But by the way, that team itself only lasted a few months. I think they went and they won this tournament here, The Gathering. And right after that, even though a month later it says first at Remedy, I think they'd already broken up. Because then what I had was, it's not listed here because it wasn't under an IP. There was a tournament called CPL Holland. It was the one that, if you remember in Quake, was won by that Russian player B100 Death, completely out of nowhere over Lakerman and Fatality, who were the two best players at the time, which was really shocking. It showed how Russian players weren't just Poloasity and Pele. That's why I'm putting all deep fucking Quake lore in the fucking CS video here, but don't worry about it. That's just my style. I am the esports historian. And basically what happened was the team had broken up already and they fractured into two different squads. There was Mafia, which is famously Veslin's team, took in, I think they took in HeatoN, HeatoN, and they might have even had him as well. And then you had All Stars, which had previously been a Finnish team, but was also a Quake team as well, who had Potty, I think Executor, and then they took in, maybe they had one of the others. Maybe they had a third person, but then they had a bunch of Danish players, like I think Majestic and Jackie Boy and people like that. Maybe even Musa, the Finnish player. They had a bunch of players in this squad. And funnily enough, these two teams that NIP had basically fractured into met in the final of the CPL. The SOA, Spirit of Amiga, Swedish division, which was Mafia, Veslin, HeatoN, Hib, etc., HeatoN, won the tournament, and the joke goes that because they met in the final and both beat everyone else in the Chargers or European tournament so easily, and then played each other, they almost like got together privately, the players who'd been in an IP, and were like, wait a minute, it's basically just us powering these teams. Like, why don't we just reform like the really good roster of Potty, HeatoN, HeatoN, Hib, and Executor? Why don't we just reform the team? So they did. And when they reformed, they went on this little streak where they went to CPL London. I mean, I think first they went to this Remedy land and beat the other players that were then in Mafia. They went to CPL London, where they won, I think, without losing a game. At CPL Berlin, they even fucked around and had Soul Edge, the younger brother of Hib, who'd previously been a member when it was a clan-based team, come in and stand in for some of the games and still won the tournament. Then after that, they had some sort of weird drama where Execute went offline. So they kicked him out the team. They didn't pick up Soul Edge after the trial. They brought Veslin in from Mafia, who I think it was because he could pay his own flight or something because his mum had money. And then they brought in Arl, who'd been off in like Too Easy and other squads, who was just like a good player. No, he'd also played in Game Online, to be fair, at the CPL London and come like third or something like that, I think. So they brought them in, and famously they went to the CPL, the first major, and won it over X3. But what a lot of people don't know is that wasn't even the real NIP lineup. That was a weird one that had Veslin and Arl in it. After that, Veslin was never in it before, he was never in it afterwards. And then Arl was in it at that point, and then years later reunited with them in SK. But they had their own circuitous route to go through here. And then as you can see, after this CPL World Championship, there's just a DreamHack and a Birdie Land. These are two Danish lands, Danish scene lands even at that. They have the scene demos and people on Amigas coding weird chip tunes, and CS lands with like BYOC and pickups, but real teams would sometimes go and try and win the money and hustle back then. So interesting detail already, as you can see, is it's not really like NIP the org in these early days, is it? It's quite different if you actually think about it. And why is there nothing more after 2002? Here, like if I go and show you here, yeah, they won that CPL, that one. Then they won this DreamHack here. And if you go and look, you're going to see it's going to be a different roster. Because what happened is after the CPL winter, they had a dispute with Vesler where he wanted to be paid back for his like flight or something from the prize money. They didn't agree to, so he left. Then what happened was, let me think what the order was that this all went in. Then Arl left to go and play with his friends that became Too Easy, which was like Fisker and Filler and Brunk and those guys. Then you had HeatoN retired. He just didn't want to play CS anymore. He was just sick of travelling. He was an excellent player, by the way. One of the absolute best of all time at that point. So what they did was they went and they got Scream and Rajcula, who'd both been playing in Matrix. Mainly for Scream. He was the real talent there. Really young, very talented player. Not to be confused with the Belgian player. I actually did a Reflections interview with this Scream. I did with both of them, but this one as well. And they actually even had a guy called Neri in at the time who was like a decent like Swedish pro-level player. And at the time, after this, or maybe this is just because it was in Sweden, they also got Executor back in the squad as well. And in this era, HeatoN and Potty had recruited this talent. They had a guy, I think he was called Buddha, was his alias, written like Buddha, the avatar of bodhisattvaness or whatever from the fucking Buddhist religion. But he was actually just this like short-haired Swedish guy who claimed he'd been involved with like, I think he'd been like a music agent already that set off alarm bells that you're in esports now. I think he also later did the Swedish Esport League, which was a great idea that eventually failed. And he was at this point in time involved with NIP, who in theory were the number one team of the world, the reigning major champions. But the problem was he basically promised him he'd get him all these sponsors and he wasn't able to do it. Remember, this is 2002, it was really early days. And so they had a website, but they never really got the sponsorship they needed. People didn't have salaries back then. And in fact, because Some of their players were even underage. They didn't even get to attend the early European CPL at that time. There was another CPL Cologne in early 2002. And this one, Executor went and played as a stand-in with, Dark was also standing in with Nordic Division, which was Veslin's team at the time. And they actually won that LAN quite easily. But the problem is the two... did I say he was Danish earlier? Because obviously Execute was Norwegian. I meant Norwegian anyway. The two Norwegian players basically were mega LAN players and hard carried this LAN. And that's actually eventually why NIP wasn't working out financially. Similar scenario. I'm Executor, I'm in NIP. What's that? We don't have any money. Well, I'll just go to this lab with these guys here. Holy shit, this is sick. They are fucking, we are fucking owning everyone here. Wait a minute. If we're the best players, why don't we just go and play with the other best players instead of staying in this team? They did a similar thing. So when the summer came around and there was going to be all these big tournaments, there was going to be the CPL, there was going to be LAN Arena, which was big at the time. What happened was they needed someone who could pay them to the event. So NIP broke up. That's right. In 2002, NIP's already broken up. Even though we are being told by the organization, we ain't for 25, you're still here. Yeah, you weren't there in 2002, bitch. I'll tell you that much. So in 2002, the roster breaks up. That's why there's no results until 2005. And if you go to here, look, 2001, 2002. Oh, what's that? Oh, you even had, Veslin left, Hib left. Hib eventually went to Game Online. Veslin went to what became Nordic Division. You had Scream and Rajcula. Then what happened is around the summer, SK Gaming, because they had BDS there with their Scandinavian squad, Legendary, Coda, Quake, Counter-Strike Figure, guy who made Geek Boys and So Gamed. He got them to join as SK Gaming Sweden. And what happened was he kept Zenon, who was the legendary player from Clan9, who was a pretty good early CS player, but not the absolute best. He was just a borderline elite player. They kept him. They got HeatoN, Potty and Execute, who played together in NIP, but not at CPL Winter, but in the past CPLs, who were mega players. And then they added Dark, who I told you just played with Executor at that CPL, and is just a bona fide stud LAN player, and himself is a legendary Quake player, in his case from Quake 2, when he played with Memento Mori, a legendary... Is that even right? Yes. No, am I thinking of his CS team there? No, I am. Memento Mori was the Quake 2 TDM team. Massive Attack was the team that Dark played for when he came 4th CPL winner 2001. Executor played for Game Online at that tournament and finished in 3rd place. Obviously, the Americans of X3 came 2nd, didn't they? So you see there, NIP closes its door, and the spoiler, SK Gaming has a lot of success after that. They win that CPL, then... They have some roster moves they make, and they're not as good at the next CPL. The following year, they win almost everything, don't they? They win, like, CPL Cannes, they win CPL Summer 2003, they win CPL Copenhagen 2003, they win World Cyber Games 2003, they win CPL Winter 2003. The next year, anyway, you get the point. So 2003, one of the most successful years, but you'll notice no NIP at this point in time. Where was NIP? I thought y'all was around all this time. Funny how that worked. They come back, is it? So what happened was, in late 2004, the contracts of people like HeatoN, Potty and the rest of them with SK Sweden were running out. And if you remember, 2004 was a sea change in Swedish Counter-Strike. Because what happened was, Hyper, a very talented player at the time, had gone and joined the guys who were in the team that eventually became called Eyeballers, funnily enough, and... Team 64 AMD, they'd been before that. And at the end of 2003, without Hyper, this team had been competitive with... oh, wait a second. Maybe I'm getting the angle wrong on that. Let me just quickly check this. I think I'm getting that story slightly off. Did he join in the latter part of 2000? I think he did. He joined in the latter 2003. Let's have a look here. Yes, he joined in the latter part of 2003. He used to play in Highland Online. And then what happened was they were the main European team contending with NIP. Like at this tournament here, they came 2nd to NIP, SK Sweden, sorry. When SK was unbeatable in theory. And then what happened was the next year, they had a weird scenario where one of those players had to exit the squad. They went to the CPL, the home ground of HeatoN and Potty and SK Gaming and NIP before that. They had to take a player called Iskal, who later was an in-game leader, but at this point in time was just a stand-in. And even with a stand-in, they amazingly won the tournament. They actually won this CPL, and SK finished 2nd to them when Element had already left and joined anyway, etc. And essentially, this was like part of the end, because after this, we already knew SK was going to make changes. They did the classic move. They just took Hyper, the stud player from probably the best player on Eyeballers, brought him to SK. Famously, they bombed the CPL and didn't get a medal because not only did they lose to 3D and Water doing that bullshit Inferno move, but also they lost actually the bronze match to Maven, which was the people who later became Lunatic High, I believe. I think that's who it is. Yes, like, these are basically the players who became Lunatic High, if you remember. Now, to be fair, this tournament had a bizarre thing where you could play Aztec in it and Maven kept picking it. Then they won the Null Elva event with all the Nordic teams. So they looked like they were back on top. But the problem is, what happens then? You go and he's in an IP. Well, here's what happened. An IP, at the end of 2004, even though their teams just won one of the decent-sized European tournaments, Null Elva, over a bunch of top Scandinavian squads, they know that their players' contracts are running out. So they don't want them to attend CPL Winter 2004, win the trophy, and then say, lol, see ya, and then just fuck off out of the org or hard negotiate. So what they tell these players is, because you guys won't sign new contracts with us, and at the time they thought they could get more money, the players, we're going to send our German team. So they sent their German team with people like Silver there, and the German team was obviously irrelevant. At the time, German CS wasn't very much. It was only Mouse Sports was any good on attacks. Like, this was like an also-run German team at this point. It wasn't the early 2000s SK that could win the smaller CPLs. So that was the CPL, if you remember. That was won by Anyway from the lower bracket, and they beat Eyeballers or Valle and Bullen and Vilden in the final. And what happened was, after that tournament, when the contracts ran out, NIP returned. On the 1st of January, NIP basically signed SK Gaming's roster and made what at the time was a super team. What they did was, the squad was HeatoN, Arl, Hyper, Vilden. So Hyper and Vilden are both players from Eyeballers, but Hyper had been there from SK. Spawn, Potty. So there's already, let me think, 3, there's 5. And Fisker was there technically, but he was listed as like inactive. So the most bizarre thing also, by the way, is it was a 6-man roster, and in theory like a 7th man or whatever, but he was just told you benched and not playing, and like he's just not good enough at the moment. So when they had this squad, on paper, this is why I made that article, this was the craziest super team you could imagine. Like, you have to realise, these are all the star players of the teams they've been on. Like, Spawn's just had an unbelievable year 2 years earlier with SK to help them win everything. HeatoN and Potty are the perennial champions who over and over again win, and Potty's probably the GOAT at this point in time. Arl is like your Zipnix type amazing support player. Hyper's just come from being like part shot caller with mid-rounding and star fragger from Eyeballers with the star AWPer of Eyeballers, Vilden, the other IGL. Like, fucking hell, like, how many talents have we got in this squad? So everyone thought, like, holy shit, they're going to win everything. And when they made this org, they were going to get, like, big salaries, and they'd have all sponsors. You know, the only problem, of course, the team actually shit the bed. Like, you can see, they added Vilden. And why is this? That only a few months later, they part ways with 4 of the members. Well, here's why. Because if you go look at the results, when they came back, they went to CPL Spain immediately and finished 3rd. They even got shockingly beaten by like Lopez's team or something mental in this tournament. Where is it? Let's see. Oh, no, it was Team 3D that they beat. Who is it that they beat then? Because I remember they lost one game that was like really embarrassing. Oh, there we go. They lost to Existence of Musambani, who was, if you don't know, like the one really good Spanish player, but Existence were nobody at the time. The idea a Spanish team could ever beat like an elite super team of Swedish players is inconceivable at the time. So they lost to them in the upper bracket. Then they ran through the lower bracket. Very close game against an IPR, who's already getting good with Kogu, etc. They go to here and they lose to Complexity, who's just put Sunman into the lineup over Bullseye, and they only finished 3rd at a European land. These guys perennially just picked up European CPLs for funsies. Right, that was bad enough. It gets worse. Then they went to Rikshack, which was a Danish land, much like a Dreamhack and a Birdie land before. Now they're going to this one thinking, we're just going to pick up some free money against Scandinavian talents here. And then what happens was, in the tournament, they go all the way to the upper bracket and they lose to Skolpojana, which basically means schoolboys in Swedish. And if you don't know, that was a mixed team, which would even have rotating members depending on what LAN you're at, which had Khan and DSN, who were still in their youth as young players. Goodfellow was already a solid player. Snyder was like a decent player in the scene, and Red was like an all right talent. This is just a mixed team. And you can see 2 players are from Big Grip here, and 3 players are from 4 Kings. They lose to them in the upper bracket final, and then in the actual final itself, You can't see it on the screen, but basically they lost the final itself to them as well. Then, if that wasn't bad enough, you're already shaken because you're not winning lands. You're getting beaten by teams you shouldn't. This is when it gets really crazy. Because at this one here, they went to this qualifier, I think. Is this the right one? No, but anyway, at this qualifier, they also didn't win this spot here to go to HeatoN 5. And it's even worse because there's some tournament, maybe it's not listed here because it's not a top placing. There was also a tournament, and for me, this is the lowest of the low. They went to a tournament with the NIP Super Team, and they lost a game to a mixed team featuring Gauzy, not G-O-Z-I-E, the game online player who was in NIP at the beginning. No, the guy most famous on So Gamed and SK Gaming for being the demo admin who would ask people like HeatoN and Potty for a POV demo to put up on the website. They lost to their former demo admin from SK on LAN in a tournament. And so unsurprisingly, this couldn't continue on. I mean, these were massive players, very, very talented, enormous egos. They're here to win. You've just joined this org. So what happened as a result was they split the squad up. Basically, HeatoN and Potty stayed. As it says, it parted ways here. Hyper actually just basically retired around this time. Vilden, Spawn and Arl took Fisker and went and got... Who would it be for this one here? Who am I missing? And got Sniden, who'd actually beat them in Skolpiana or whatever, Skolpoi Kana, and they made SK Gaming Sweden again, and they won that smaller CPL that was the same time he used to be seen. But by the end of the year, they'd become the best team and they won CPL Winter, famously even playing against an IP in the game where Spawn attempted the ninja defuse that the crowd ruined. Now, while they fucked off and left HeatoN and Potty at this time was even listed as inactive after that Barcelona tournament, NIP rebuilt. They took in Valle, who'd been an extremely good player the latter years and had been on eyeballers. And then they took in two lesser-known players. They took in Zet, who'd won the HeatoN 5 qualifier with that SSV Linux team. Just a mega-talented up-and-coming player. Arguably the player of the year in 2005. And they took in Inns, who in later years would play with Fnatic and had a lot of success. But at the time was just more of like a kind of a Clutch Zipnik style type player who fills in the gaps. Maybe even help with some shot-calling elements, I forget. So they bring them back in, and then after that, the team qualifies for ESWC. They have some all right results. This is not a massive tournament to win. They're just an all right team around this time. You know, they're like borderline elite. Meanwhile, SK.swe actually becomes the best. Then the next year, they brought in a whole bunch of different players. Like Spawn came back eventually. They had Robban came into this roster. HeatoN even played a little bit still and then eventually got swapped out, and it became a team which actually had a lot of success. Look how many tournaments they're winning. Famously, they smashed Fnatic almost every time they played them. Look how many lands they're winning, boys. They're winning a whole bunch of lands. Famously, they came into World Cyber Games. They on paper were supposed to win the gold medal. They got shocked by this little Polish team with some guys called Neo and Taz that was called the Golden Five and had only existed with that roster for like 3 or 4 months or 4 or 5 months or something. Still won DreamHack Winter. They won all these stuff. They were actually the team of the year in theory. Then the next year, what happened is though, the roster started to change over the year. And by the time you get later, let's just go look at that a second. It says Spawn's a standing, but he played a whole bunch of the lands. Maybe because they didn't win World Cyber Games. Spawn and Robban leave and join SK Gaming in January. Zet leaves to join Complexity and go and play in CGS in America for a massive salary. Inns leaves to go to Fnatic. And then look at the roster they rebuild with HeatoN. HeatoN comes back from inactivity. He brings in Bullen, who'd been a very talented player. KF3, a Norwegian guy who most famously said that ridiculous thing at World Cyber Games that was quite toxic. And Mini Valle was obviously Valle's brother, who I think Valle just asked to be in the team. Now, later, they added Tentpole, who'd been a very talented player the previous year in Fnatic, but didn't want to travel as much, so he came over here. And a player called Face, who was an up-and-coming, like, skilled fragger, as Bullen and Configure KF3 left only a few months later. Then Mini Valle comes in here. He's replaced in August by someone called Get Right, who'd already shown his skills at the qualifiers, and HeatoN took over as coach and spoiler. The team basically died after that. So again, if I go to here, why does 2007 just cut off in September? And why doesn't it even say the team broke up? After that, NIP didn't exist. If you don't know, after that point in time, you had, I think it was like, I know Valet, I know Tentpole and Rob had already left. So I know Tentpole and Valet went over to SK Gaming, where they became second to Forrest and Khan and Inz's Fnatic. And then Face also joined that team at some point in time. So already NIP's gone again. 2007, it doesn't start until 2012. Now it's back about SK Gaming, Fnatic, instead of it being other squads, Eyeballers and NIP, Eyeballs and SK. Now it's SK Gaming and Fnatic are the top teams in Sweden. And it's not until the end of CS 1.6 that NIP returns in 2012. In August, the team comes back for Global Offensive with Forrest and Get Right, who'd both just been in SK Gaming. And if you don't know, we're competing for Team of the Year in 2011 and won ESWC, and we're in the final of the World Cyber Games, and we're semis of the IM Major, and we're a very good team. We won DreamHack Summer. You had Freiburg and Fiflaurin, who were source players, Fiflaurin being the better known one, and Exist had been a skilled fragger in Fnatic this year, where they'd been dominant, and had been a good player even in 2011, and obviously had won that IEM famously with Khan at the beginning of 2011, the European finals. So, an interesting detail, this lineup didn't have to happen. As far as I know, this roster, I think they even at one point in time had Face instead of one of these players, was even offered, I believe, probably by Get Right, if I had to guess, I think he's the guy who had the org connections, to SK. Just at the time, SK, like a lot of other big European orgs, didn't believe in CSGO. It was a tiny game. It didn't even have proper IEM support. It was in the ESL Master Series. And as a result, they didn't think the game was going to be good. And they didn't want to pay a big contract. So NIP, the org, came back. Somehow they got the funding. HeatoN was back. Someone was funding the org at the time. And back it went up. And then obviously this org now, through some different changes in management and potentially in ownership over the years, now they've existed. So you could say they've existed for the last 13 years straight. Before that, they had like a couple of years they existed. Before that, they had a year and a half, a couple of years that they existed. They did not exist for 25 years. That is absolute nonsense. Not even vaguely true. So I think actually the more interesting thing to me is that it shows through telling you the story, this almost oral history of NIP, how esports became more professional over the years and went from being just a clan name, and you can change that name anytime and join anyone, to where you go and which orgs have the money, to what's going on with the dynamics of politics and the Game of Thrones of the Swedish scene.
I don't forget the people that support me. And in the case of this video, that would be Matt Pugnatio, Rajcula, Jasun, Jensen Goh, Nicky, Tosh, Thooorin, and you know who I'm always going to give the biggest shout out to, my boy Jerky's Minion. Do you want to ask a question for my video AMA? Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Maybe you want to find out who the next guest is on one of my interviews that I've already recorded but not yet released. Or maybe you want to take part in one of those fabled long-form discussions where you get to decide the topics. Well, if any of those perks or others tickle your fancy, simply click on the Patreon link in the description box below and put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today.